To do a frequency coordination video, um, and so I'm outside here at my house. So two caveats: one is that my dog might start barking in a minute, and I might have to quiet her down. The other um, being that you'll hear some sort of outside noise probably in the background. I have two different programs that I use for frequency or for spectrum analysis: Vantage and Touchstone Pro. I actually think Touchstone Pro is the better bet right now for the RF Explorers, just because Vantage doesn't work with the most updated firmware. There's basically some resolution bandwidth issues where you can only scan about 2.5 megahertz at a time accurately. So it works really well if you're looking to monitor individual frequencies. Not so great if you're trying to do this, which is using 470 to 608, which is the soon-to-be upper and lower limits of the UHF spectrum that are available to us as wireless mic users. So basically plugged in those numbers, and then I'm just going to hit start scanning. And again, this is in Charlottesville, Virginia. I also want to make sure that you notice that I set the resolution bandwidth down to 25 kilohertz to make sure that my export to Wireless Workbench is as sort of specific as possible, I guess would be the way to put it. And you'll notice that every single time it draws a trace, the current trace is being drawn in white. The most recent trace was in green, and what is essentially the max trace, which means the highest signal that we've experienced at that given point on the x-axis, is done in red. And that's the trace that I like to use. I like to use the max trace after scanning for a good amount of time and scanning in every sort of location where my receivers are going to be. So for a wedding, that means I'm at my reception location, I'm at my ceremony location where my wireless receivers are going to be, and I'm also at the ceremony site itself, which sometimes might be on clearer or higher ground, as it was for me last weekend. If you saw that last video that I did, the ceremony itself was in a clearing on higher ground than where I was for the ceremony setup, so the signal levels were a little bit higher there, and that's where my IEM receiver was. So we're not getting anything too serious or any changes, so I'm going to go ahead and just stop it. I actually tend to leave that running basically during my entire load-in to try and get as much data as I can. Anything, from the kitchen, anybody else's devices, anything else going on, comm units for the wedding planner, anything like that. So I'll stop it. And then again, I'm going to export the max trace because I want to be as conservative as possible. Test Wireless Workbench. I'll just put it on the desktop. And then basically what you're getting when you do that is it's a CSV comma separated value file where it's basically just doing so frequency and signal level, and that's it. So as you scroll through the UHF spectrum, that's sort of just, and if you point, let's see, if we go to somewhere in the low 580s, we'll see that that's where we had some, some stronger signal strength here from a TV station. So that's just to give you an idea of what it looks like. And then when we go into Wireless Workbench, what we'll see is that's where we start to use this stuff. And then I'm not going to update the firmware. So I'm just going to add the gear that I actually use, and I'm not going to update this stuff right now. So I'm going to add the gear I actually use in a wedding ceremony, and I'm also going to unplug my RF Explorer now, so it might quit. Yeah, I thought it might. Okay. So I use a Shure UR4D in the G1 band. That's 2 channels. I use an Audio Technica 3000 Gen 4 in the DE2 band. I had to add that myself. I use Sennheiser IEM A band. I use for my reception rig a QLXD H50, and then I also use a couple of UR5s as just sort of general wireless anything. If I need to add a second speaker at the ceremony, if I need to have a remote speaker at the reception, anything like that, I'll use my UR5s as the receivers. So you can see that's all plugged into my inventory here. And then in the frequency coordination tab, I am going to go ahead and import my scan. The live scan files. So on the desktop, test wireless workbench, that's the scan we just ran. So that is importing from Touchstone into wireless workbench the scan we just ran, and that's the visual representation of the max trace. The other thing I want to do is, just in case any TV stations near me are not currently broadcasting or not broadcasting at their highest power setting, I also want to go in and add TV channels. So I'm 22903 right here. We'll do 50 miles. If you're indoors, you can probably get away with a smaller radius because the TV stations won't penetrate indoors as much. If you're outdoors, you might want to do a larger radius, although I think 50 miles is plenty conservative for most applications. So that's basically gone in, and it's found all the TV stations in their database within 50 miles. So I've hit save. And basically you can see that my scan actually already picked up those TV stations, but there's also, there's not always going to be that level of certainty, particularly if you're scanning in the early afternoon, anything like that. You can also add a frequency where, for instance, if you've got a videographer and they're not willing to let you do their frequency coordination, if they just say, no, sorry, dude, I'm broadcasting at 555.500, you can go in and add that in as just something that's happening that you really can't predict. But if they aren't willing to fire it up for you sort of like during your scan, you would have otherwise not known to include it. But then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do frequencies from inventory. So now I've got all of my inventory loaded. These are all of my microphones, all of my IEM transmitters. I'm also going to, you kind of have to use some common sense with this red line here. This basically is telling the wireless workbench software anything above that line I want to consider to be too strong to mess with. So if you're in a super crowded RF environment where there's lots and lots and lots of TV stations, you might have to bring that all the way up to, say, -70. If, like me, you are in a relatively weak TV market, and you can see that as I'm bringing it down, it's excluding more and more and more frequencies. So let's say I bring it all the way down to 110, which is the maximum it will let me take it down. That's as aggressive as I can be. I'm only going to operate, or I'm only going to get picked for a channel that is below that really, really low threshold. So the first thing that I do is I hit calculate, And then I also like to use a little bit of common sense after the calculation. And basically, I actually really like what I was given here. What I really want to try and do is make sure that the frequencies that I'm given, which are sort of these green flags here, are as far away as possible from my major sources of heavy noise, which are going to be generally those TV stations, or in this case, it looks like there's also some activity on channels 15, 16, and even in the lower part of 14. That could be emergency vehicles, could be, I really don't even know what. But let me get it to recalculate to see if there's something that I can get it to do. So, for instance, for this one, if this is what it came up with, this would technically work. But this one here, this 481 125, I don't really like it because it's in the middle of a bunch of noise. And that's just going to make it harder for my receiver to pick it up. Would it work? Yes. And if I were in a crowded RF environment, New York City, Los Angeles, whatever, I would just have to deal. But I'm not in one of those places, so I don't have to just deal. And so one of the things you can do is, so like this one, this is my, what is it? Does it want to show me? Oh, that's going to have me move it. If you get something you really like, you can lock the frequency. So like here, I really like this QLXD. I like that UR5. I like that UR5. So I'm going to lock the QLXD. I'm going to lock the UR5s. Those are good and away from noise. I really like these two. These are my UHF-R 522, my Sen. Okay. These are locked. And honestly, these are pretty good. This is really all pretty far away from noise. That's good. I mean, that's at least 3 megahertz away from any source of noise. So honestly, that's good too. But if just as an example, if you want to lock all but one frequency, you can get it to calculate again, and you can keep moving that calculation until you get it where you want it. Like, let's say I want it there, again, just sort of right in the middle. In my area, it looks like channels like 20 to really 29, 30, 31, up to 30. 20 to 30 are basically like completely blank. And then I've locked all of those. If I had them all networked and they were all Shure units, I could actually deploy them right to the actual frequencies, right to the actual units, and then all I have to do is sync the transmitters or receivers. In this case, because I do have Audio Technica stuff, I do have Sennheiser stuff, and in particular, like these UR5s, I can't network them in. They're not in a rack. I basically end up just like screenshotting this or writing it down and then just plugging it all in, and then going from there. But this is basically, this shows you what you're excluding and for what reasons. That's TV. That's an additional exclusion based on this threshold here. User, I guess, would be as if you added something on your own. But if you do have any questions, let me know. Again, this is primarily targeted at DJs who are running only a few channels of wireless. If you're running 30, 40 channels of wireless because it's a band and you've got a bunch of IEMs, you've got a bunch of mics, you're not going to be able to be this type of picky. But I'm in a small market. I'm only running, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 channels of wireless. So it is important that they're all coordinated, and it is important that, I get with my videographers or anybody else that's running any wireless, wedding planner, venue, if they have walkie-talkies, anything like that, and just make sure that, we're all working together. But this is sort of targeted at that. If you're, if you're running those 30, 40 channels of wireless for a band, whatever, you're not going to be able to be quite this picky like I was, where I was really trying to get all of my channels in really sort of green pasture there. Any questions, definitely let me know.